So how does DevOps differ, and in particular, how, what are the important attributes of DevOps that make them easier to transform? So if you kind of break down a comparison of traditional IT app and DevOps, this is a pretty broad brush comparison, but gives you the general idea. You start with traditional IT being large legacy systems. Generally, changes are being developed in large batches, which can make it difficult with transformations because you've got typically long lead times. It's going to take a long time to get feedback and so on as you make improvements for DevOps. Whereas DevOps prefers micro size changes, so individual changes or small features and so on. That way you can test changes of the pipelines and the features and applications and get feedback relatively quickly, which is really valuable when you're doing a transformation. Traditional IT organizations tend to be large, siloed, compartmentalized, functional organization structures, which can be challenging if you have difficult communication. If you have to raise a request to communicate to let's say between dev and QA, or QA and ops, or dev and security, if those are highly siloed, then there can be a lot of communication bottlenecks, which slows down the transformation. DevOps prefers more autonomous, dedicated cells, or at least, highly flexible communication policies and capabilities. Scheduling, old traditional IT is more centralized, where you've got, let's say, a centralized project manager dealing with all the schedules for a lot of different projects. But DevOps, you prefer to decentralize that to make it a little more flexible and agile, more continuous scheduling. You may make adjustments as you go along, depending on what you find. Under performance and culture, for traditional IT, releases tend to be fairly high risk events because there are large amounts of changes going out at once. And it's concerning because if you have a problem, how do you deal with the large changes? How do you diagnose problems? How do you revert if you have a problem, or roll back? It can be more complex. But DevOps, if things are very small and agile, then they say like it's very much kind of easy to roll back. You have a lot of confidence. So the metaphor here is it's like breathing. You know how to do it. You don't even have to think about it hardly. It's a lot easier. And maybe it's not quite like breathing, but the concept is similar. Information flow in traditional IT, and this is what comes up in the quiz, I believe, disseminated. So it's, in other words, top down, send out information, expect everybody to do something or read about it or figure out what to do. Whereas in DevOps, information flow tends to happen as needed in order to cause actions to occur more iteratively and more, immediately, not just send out general information. Culture in the traditional IT, generally speaking, failure is not a good thing. You generally don't want to fail. Failures can cause a lot of interruptions, especially when you have large batch changes and so on. Whereas in DevOps, it's far more high trust. If you fail, you want to fail early, so you want to have systems in place that will detect problems quickly. And it's okay as long as you can recover quickly. So it's a different cultural perspective. Metrics at the traditional IT level tend to be big picture metrics like overall cost, overall capacity for the overall system. Whereas in DevOps, the metrics tend to be a little more focused on flow, such as like the first way and delivering value quickly, things that are going to give you more of a transactional view and quick actional view of what to do. And final on the list under measurements, the agile concept of definition of done. In the traditional IT world, it's like, I did my job, I'm done, even if others aren't done and they haven't got a product out the door. Whereas DevOps is more about making sure that the outcomes are realized, however those outcomes are defined, even if it involves multiple people. Nobody will declare a victory and say that they're done until it's pretty clear that the real outcomes are accomplished. Certainly this is not an exhaustive list, but it gives you some food for thought on how you're going to, things you should be concerned about when you're going through a DevOps transformation. So there's quite a large difference between, the middle column and the right column. Your transformations are going to have to migrate, activities, people, process, and tools kind of from left to right as you go through the transformation. Okay. So we're going to have individual slides on each of those points just to further explain it. So think about the first one, batch sizes from big to micro. Traditional IT, large releases, thousands of lines of code, multiple teams involved in the changes. Generally, you have a lot of testing going on in parallel, fairly complicated. Whereas with DevOps, you have more small micro releases, one piece of functionality at a time, created typically by a single team that are fairly integrated, intimate knowledge of the product, easier to test because it's compact and contained, and for the most part, pretty easy to understand, both from a development and well as diagnostic and recovery and deployment point of view. The other idea in the list was organization, skill-centric silos to autonomous dedicated teams. So the traditional IT, you've got silos around skills, like maybe development skills, test skills, operation skills, maybe tools groups. They're very skill-oriented organization structures. Whereas in the DevOps, it's more cell-oriented, where there's cross-functional team members that can help each other instead of just a functional focus, maybe database, skills, but within a siloed team, but you're going to have database skills available to the cross-functional team in DevOps, so you can share a lot better. Going to be more optimized for flow. When something slows down in one area, other people jump in and help rather than pointing at the other organization. A lot of collaboration and quick communication in the DevOps world. On the traditional IT, cost is optimized usually at the big picture level. And overall flow may not be properly optimized. You can, cost may be optimized for some segment or some organization, but end to end, it may turn out that even creates bottlenecks if you over optimize one area. Whereas DevOps, you don't have handoffs, teams contain all the skills, and you're trying to balance flow much better. Yeah, so the traditional IT, a lot of handoffs and waiting from resources from other team members and so on. So definitely, it's not only, things that you should be concerned about, but with transformations, but it gives you some idea of why you want to do this, because clearly the right side has got a lot of benefits. Okay, another item in the list was centralized to decentralized scheduling, continuous scheduling. So in traditional IT, you have large scheduling, release managers are managing the schedules. They may or may not be part of the DevOps team. A lot of coordination activities across teams, so some interdependencies even in terms of people being available to coordinate things. That may be a bottleneck. Lots of meetings because you have to keep each other up to date. A lot of possibly paperwork and other workloads, non-value-added work just to keep each other informed. Whereas with DevOps, you don't really have a scheduling team. Instead, the individual DevOps teams work on their own, and they're pretty clear what the schedules are, just through ongoing communication. Generally speaking, you decouple from other releases, so you have a minimum amount of impact between releases, and that avoids that bottleneck. You may still have meetings, but not as many, and they tend to be shorter and more focused. Generally speaking, you're not favoring a lot of paperwork. Instead, you're favoring implementation and action. Doesn't mean you don't have documentation, but it should be, a lot more streamlined and focused on what you're doing in incremental efforts. The bottom line is scheduling definitely changes when you're transforming from traditional IT to DevOps.